Now, listen to what Lisa Berkenkötter and Christina Ezra will tell us about formal requirements. I think, Christina, you will start.
Yes, hello. A warm welcome to you from my side. I'm Christina and I'm here today with my colleague Lisa. And as mentioned before, we are from the EUKI Finance team. In the following part, we will give you some more insights on the formal requirements of your EUKI application with a focus on financial and commercial aspects. We actually know that those commercial parts of a funding application are sometimes not the most favorite part, but Lisa and I can promise you that the better you understand the requirements, the easier it is for you to fill out this part of the application. And I would like to motivate you a little bit to work on the finances, and thus I start with a little detour. When speaking about finances in the context of a project, I always use the following picture. I hope that most of you know where this image comes from. It's from the movie The Matrix. And you might also remember what it meant in the movie. Looking at this was a way to see into the matrix from outside of the matrix. So basically, when you create a budget for your project, it is the same. Others might only see numbers, but actually you can see exactly what is going to happen in your project. So preparing this part of the EUKI application hopefully gives you a bit of the Keanu Reeves vibes. So here's what we're going to present to you now. We start with the general eligibility criteria with regards to commercial aspects, and then we will give you some more details on the conditions on financing, as well as hints on how to select your implementing partners well. And we will finish with the most common mistakes that occurred to applicants in the past, so you can luckily avoid those mistakes.
Okay, so we will start with the legal requirements for your application. The applying organization as well as the implementing partners must be non-profit according to your articles of association or actual management. In case there's a commercial operation alongside a non-profit business, you must prove that the project is being implemented exclusively in the non-profit part of your business. Only legal entities and those with legal capacity are eligible for funding. This means, for example, you have an organization that operates in several countries. So not only an office in one country is eligible for funding, but the organization must operate in this specific country legally and financially independent. And last but not least, individuals are not eligible for financing.
I now continue with general requirements that your organization has to fulfill. You need to have at least one employee who has a commercial qualification and who can handle financial and legal tasks in a professional manner. This person shall implement the project cost efficiently and monitor and account for the project. And he or she should also keep track of the financial statements that you have to send us at regular intervals. Moreover, you need to have a suitable software-assisted accounting system that must meet national standards established by a national legislator. An Excel sheet with incomes and expenditures is not sufficient. And the system also needs to be operated by qualified bookkeeping staff. You should also be familiar with tendering procedures. This is actually a very important aspect, and this we will also check very carefully in your application. You have to present your own written contract award rules that describe the process of how you handle tenders in your organization. We will also ask you to explain to us your internal control system, and we would like to understand what internal control bodies you have. Those internal control mechanisms have to be based on certain principles. It's the principle of transparency, cross-checking, functional separation, and minimum information. You will find further information on this in our information on financing. The last point is that EUKI recipients need to have a certain financial strength. Our guideline is that the average annual project financing you apply for shall not exceed the average annual revenue of the past 3 financial years of the implementer. I know this is a little bit difficult, so I say it again. In other words, you as the implementer calculate your average annual revenue of the past 3 years. And this is a maximum EUKI funding per year you can apply for. Meaning if you apply for a project period of 2 years, the maximum funding would be double the amount of your average annual revenue. For all points that Lisa and I mentioned here, we will ask for specific records as proof. No worries though, there is a list in our application form where you can see exactly what we require, so you don't need to write on everything here now. And we will check all these records in our so-called legal and commercial eligibility check. This is a check that we execute next to the technical check. And it's a regular part of the EUKI selection process. However, we would like to emphasize that it is very important for us that you don't forget that we need to have translations of all the relevant documents into English or German.
Okay, there are some financial and budgetary requirements also to be in mind when applying for the EUKI funding. So first, even if it's obvious, expenditures are only eligible within the specific project period. This means, for example, that expenditures for producing project outlines or proposals are not eligible. The budget and later the contract is based on expenditures. Only in exceptional cases for organizations based in Germany, project financing can be calculated on a cost basis. In general, expenditures used for climate action are eligible. Even materials and equipment that are to be used to apply and disseminate technical solutions can be financed in exceptional cases for a relatively small application. An appropriate contribution to the cost of the project out of own and or third-party funds is expected. This underlines your own interest in the project. Any activities financed by third parties must have a clear content-wise relation to the activities financed by the EUKI grant, and exclusion of double funding must be ensured. Only those own or third-party funds which can be monetarily classified and for which evidence can be provided may be included in your budget. Usually for small NGOs, a co-financing rate of approximately 5% can be deemed appropriate. But this needs to be seen case by case and in general depends on the financial strength and general availability of funds for your organization in the respective country. The implementing organization must be able to carry out the project and its main task both in terms of content and administration. This should also be reflected in the budget planning. However, services and activities which cannot be carried out from your organization but are still necessary for the project can be financed as a subcontracted services. For the awarding of external services, as Christina already said, it is mandatory that a tendering procedure for contracts, for example, onwards €1,000 is required. Continuing with the financial and budgetary requirements, project financing must be used in a way to support sustainable development in the partner countries. This includes the implementation of a significant part of the project by implementers or the implementing partners in the target countries. This means that the largest share of the project budget should be calculated for the implementation outside of Germany. Within the first application phase, it is not required to submit a detailed budget already. Nevertheless, we would highly recommend that you make yourself already from the beginning familiar with the financial requirements and plan adequate resources on this basis. Important to know also for your project budget is each implementing organization will receive an own separate budget. You have already asked before, so we are limited to a maximum of 4 implementing partners, which means in the second stage of your project, when you have 4 partners, you will submit 5 budget, 1 for the implementer and 4 for the implementing partner each. Expenditures will be allocated to different cost categories, which have different requirements. And last but not least, indirect project expenditures, such as office rent, telephone, internet, and so on, can be included as administration costs of a maximum of 11% of planned direct costs.
Okay, we would like to focus now on another very important aspect, and that is the selection of your implementing partners. If you yourself plan to be the implementing organization, why is that so important? Please don't forget, the implementer will have sole responsibility for the nature of its own contractual relationship with its implementing partners. That means you, as the implementer, have a contract with EUKI, and the implementing partners have a contract with your organization. That means you really have to make sure that you select your partners well and according to certain criteria that are also stipulated in the contract between the implementer and EUKI. And the documentation of these assessments as proof that the selection has been made by you need to be to EUKI or an auditor upon request. So this is not part of your application, but has to be done before you submit your documents to us. So what are those possible criteria for selection? Your partner has to have available capacity for the project implementation. So you should, for example, question if there is sufficient capacity in terms of employees and premises available for the activities in the planned project period, or if the organization maintains a professional bookkeeping system. Next point, please check if the potential partner organization has enough experience in implementing third-party funded projects in order to make sure that they are not newbies to that. Moreover, also, the partner organization needs to have at least 1 employee with a commercial and financial qualification, and of course, also qualified staff to carry out the technical project planning and implementation. And the last point, basically as mentioned before by Benjamin, the partner organization needs to be based in either an EU member state, the Western Balkans, or Turkey.
Okay, so we will end our part of the presentation with some most common mistakes, which will help you to prepare your application in a more efficient way. So first of all, it is clear that incomplete application cannot be taken into account. However, we noticed that supporting documents needed for the application were not prepared completely and with not sufficient forwarding planning. So if you put more effort into the supporting documents beforehand, you will save yourself and your implementing partners, as well as us, an extensive long review phase afterwards. Also, some applicants think that the EUKI Secretariat speaks all European language. So unfortunately, Unfortunately, this is not the case. So, for example, I'm so sorry, but I do not understand your national legislation in Greek, or I cannot understand your annual accounts in Bulgarian. So, because of that, it's really, really important that you make sure that you provide us with the appropriate translation so that we can easily read your documents afterwards. This saves us and you also during the time of the examination time, sorry. Likewise, every now and then, applicants submit budgets in which more than 50% of the expenditures is to remain in Germany. Of course, of what we have already told you before, this is not possible. In the same way, we have already had applicants who based almost their entire project ideas on external inputs. Although we have written in our guidelines and I have said you before that you only need or you should include subcontracting in only individual cases. So if you want to succeed with your application, you will bear that point also in mind. And last but not least, a common mistake is also that the planned budget stands in no financial relation to the planned activities. So, for example, if far too few resources are planned for the planned activities or the other way around. So, please remember that point also while applying.
Of course, the information we just gave to you were only the most important points. We highly recommend you acquire further information on our website. A really good way to learn more about our requirements and the processes is the new EUKI learning platform. There you find video tutorials on several topics that we just mentioned. And you find the platform on our website, euki.de/learning. And there you can also filter for recipients. So you see all the videos that are relevant to you. We also recommend you read through the documents and templates on the subpage of the website for the selection procedure. You see the link here. There you find a list of documents on the right-hand side of the page, sorted by the stages of the application process. Here, like basically here on your screen now, you can see a list of very helpful documents that we recommend reading in terms of commercial and legal aspects. Of course, there's also a lot more information on the technical part, but this is what we consider very important when it comes to commercial and legal aspects. One document I would like to especially point out to is the example EUKI grant agreement, or for German recipients, the Zuschussvertrag. This will, of course, be the lead document in a possible relationship between you and EUKI, and it is really very important that you carefully read through it already before you apply, so you understand our conditions well. Yes, thank you very much for listening to this part of the Info Day, and we are now looking forward to your questions.
Yeah, thank you very much, Lisa and Christina, for your input. We see lots of hands are raising in the chat box, but unfortunately we cannot unmute your microphone. So please, if you raise the hand and you have a question, please write the question in the chat box. But we already received lots of questions, which were submitted in the chat. Lisa and Christina will now answer them. Well, we also clustered them. So the first cluster will be eligibility criteria. The question is, we consider a project that involves more coordination and coalition building work amongst RES associations from the Central Eastern Europe region. Considering they are non-governmental organizations that promote renewable energy and to various extent do provide consultancy services, how does that measure against your requirement that the non-profits are not maintaining commercial activities? Can these associations still be implementing partners?
Yeah, actually, Lisa also mentioned that before. So if within one and the same institution you have a commercial operation alongside a non-profit business, the commercial operation is excluded from financing. And in those cases, the implementer must prove that the project is being implemented exclusively in the non-profit area of the business.
Okay, thank you. Another question. If our organization is not yet a non-profit organization, would we be eligible for the funding if the funding of a GmbH, which is a German construct, is part of the project roadmap?
Unfortunately not. You have to be fully registered at the time when you submit your project outline. So it is not possible to fund a GmbH in this case as part of the project itself.
Okay. The conditions for the average revenue is applicable to all partners in the project or only to the project leader?
Actually, only for the project leader to actually, like, this is a part that we will check. As I said, we have the contract, or the contractual relationship will be between the implementer and EUKI. So we mainly focus on the implementer also when we do our checks. However, also as said, the implementer itself needs to do certain checks with the implementing partner, and I highly recommend that this will actually be part of your check of the implementing partner to also see what is their average revenue and if they will be able to handle a certain amount of money.
Okay, thank you. Another question in the cluster of eligibility criteria. What do you mean by internal procedures for financing in the case of a small NGO? If the NGO is financed through EU projects, it follows the rules of the financing entity. Also, the tendering procedures are given by the law. Is not a matter of internal procedure. By the law, given by the law.
Yeah, given by the law. Yeah. Actually, what we would like to see is that you, first of all, wrote down your internal procedures. So basically, everything like from implementing, for example, a service that you would like to provide until you pay for the final expenditures of this. And we would like to see the whole process alongside. And as I said, based on certain principles. So first of all, that this process is very transparent, that it includes cross-checking. So and also this separation of functions within your team. So to make sure that not one and the same person, let's say, orders something, works with a service supplier and pays for the invoice, but that several people are involved. And this does not only necessarily include financial processes, but it can also be data protection, that you follow certain rules. So we would like to have a description. I understand that in the beginning you always think like, well, what can I write in this part of the application? But if you think about it, you actually notice that every organization has certain measures when it comes to this. We will also give you some more hints in the application process, like what points you should consider. And when it comes to tendering procedures, yes, there is rules for every country in the European Union. For tendering procedures, check what is applicable in your country. However, you should also check what is the GIZ standard. And if the GIZ standard for tendering procedures is more strict than in your own country, you have to follow the GIZ standards.
Okay, thank you very much, Christina, for this explanation. Now let's head over to Lisa, and we are going to the cluster conditions on financing. Do universities need co-funding as well?
Yes, as we have already mentioned in our presentation, it is requirement that each implementer, as well as the implementing partners, are include a co-financing. So I would highly recommend that you check again our EUKI information on financing or the FAQ, where you can see other required information as well. And please check internally what kind of co-financing you can include. So for example, own staff is normally a lot of included in the budget, or other details. Depends on what you are planning, what kind of activities you're planning in your project. But in general, for all projects, co-financing is requirement.
Okay, thank you. This is a question about a partner. In this case, it's a municipality, and the partner doesn't want to receive money for human resources. Can they receive financial aid for material resources, for instance, for website, means of transportation, and so on?
Yeah, so we have no rule or requirement that you need to include certain or specific budget categories in your budget. So this is really up to the whole consortium and how you're planning your project. So you do not need to include staff costs. Sure, in general, depending on the applying organization. For example, you as a municipality may have already a lot of persons already working on third-party funded projects, so you have a certain staff, and you do not need to finance it with other sources, so this is totally fine. You could think about maybe including this as own funds as well, but please make sure that the other thing, what I have mentioned before, that you need to be careful about what to include. For example, expenditures for materials and equipment, when you want to include a lot, this is only be possible in a relatively small application. So you can include, for example, travel costs or costs for meetings and workshops and so on. Depends a little bit on your structure and what you're planning. But in
Okay,
general, there's no rule what you need to include in your budget. So feel free, and then afterwards we will have a look on the details.
okay, thank you. And this leads me to directly to the next question dealing with staff time. Can executive and operational staff time directly spent on project be included in direct staff costs rather than the 11% is overhead?
Yeah, so this depends a little bit on the structure. So how many persons you are going to include in the project staff. We require in general own staff of a minimum of 10% work participation over the whole project period. And when you have only 2 or 3% like executives or other persons involved, you should include this in the overhead. So it depends a little bit on the general work participation over the whole project period.
Okay, and now we have a question from a nonprofit organization which is not normally working year-round, full-time. So they work with lots of freelancers. Do they have count these freelancers as subcontractors, although they are working with them very often?
Yeah, so this in general depends a little bit on the national legislation. So from the German GIZ side, we have certain rules regarding external experts and own staff. So external experts are only necessary for specific input and not on a regular basis. And own staff have a regular contract with your organization, which is based on social security and taxes and so on. Nevertheless, we know that there are specific national legislation, and this is why I mentioned this. So please have a look on your national legislation and what is meant in your country as, and for example, an in-house consultant. So this would be possible when this in-house consultant, for example, has a contract on a regular basis, but is not seen as from the German side own stuff. But when they are only frequently there, or then they have only a specific input, this is for sure, I think, from both sides subcontracting. So if you have certain or specific questions in regards to your application, please write us an email as well, and then maybe we can go a little bit into the details.
Okay, thank you very much, Lisa. Now I will hand over to Christina, and we are dealing with a cluster of selection of implementing partners. This question deals with universities. Do you consider university or a separate faculty within one university as a potential implementing partner?
Yes, actually, universities or a faculty as a part of a university can be an implementing partner as long as the other criteria that I mentioned before are also fulfilled. I assume the university has, of course, its own legal personality, so a faculty as part of it can apply. And please also check again the information, the EUKI information on financing. You also find some further information about universities there.
Okay, thank you. And now we have I think the last question dealing with an organization which, oh, okay, let me read. If my organization will decide to apply for 2 projects in 2 different consortium, is there any limit for a total amount of money one organization can get?
No. So I think this is a question or similar what Benjamin has already answered. So we have no rule in general that one organization can only apply once or only once as implementer and implementing partner. So there can be the way that only one organization maybe receive one funding through one project, but in general, there's no rule, so you can apply for how many projects you would like.
Okay, thank you very much, Lisa and Christina.